The history of democracy, ancient roots, flaws, and the shadows of its future democracy, often hailed as the pinnacle of human political achievement, is a system of governance that has evolved over millennia, shaped by the aspirations and failures of countless societies. Its roots stretch back to the ancient world, where the first seeds of collective decision-making were sown. Yet, for all its promise, democracy has always been a fragile construct, vulnerable to the darker impulses of human nature. Today, as populism rises like a specter across the globe, the future of democracy hangs in the balance, teetering on the edge of an abyss. Now, before we move on, please help a small channel grow. Please like and subscribe. If you have any comments, good or bad, leave them below. Back to the story. Ancient roots, the birth of an ideal. The story of democracy begins in ancient Athens, around the 5th century BCE. Here, in the cradle of Western civilization, the concept of rule by the people, demos, people, and kratos, power, first took shape. Athenian democracy was a radical experiment, a departure from the autocratic rule of kings and tyrants. Citizens, though a limited group excluding women, slaves, and foreigners, gathered in the agora to debate and decide on matters of state. It was a system built on the belief that collective wisdom could prevail over individual ambition. Yet, even in its infancy, democracy was flawed. The Athenian model was exclusive, elitist, and prone to manipulation. The philosopher Socrates, one of its most vocal critics, was sentenced to death by a democratic vote, a stark reminder of the system's potential for tyranny. The Peloponnesian War exposed further weaknesses, as demagogues like Cleon exploited public sentiment to push for disastrous military campaigns. Democracy, it seemed, was as much a tool for enlightenment as it was a weapon for chaos. The Roman Republic, a precursor to modern democracy, the Roman Republic, which emerged centuries later, offered a more structured approach to democratic governance. Power was divided among elected officials, a senate, and popular assemblies, creating a system of checks and balances. Yet, the Republic was also plagued by corruption, inequality, and the rise of populist leaders like Julius Caesar, who exploited public discontent to seize power. The fall of the Republic and the rise of the Roman Empire marked a turning point, as democracy gave way to autocracy, and the ideals of collective rule were buried under the weight of imperial ambition. The Dark Ages and the Renaissance, democracy in retreat for centuries, democracy lay dormant, a relic of the ancient world. The fall of Rome ushered in the Dark Ages, a period dominated by feudalism, monarchies, and theocratic rule. The idea of popular sovereignty was all but forgotten, replaced by the divine right of kings and the rigid hierarchies of the medieval world. Yet, even in this bleak landscape, the seeds of democracy persisted. The Magna Carta of 1215, though a product of baronial self-interest, laid the groundwork for constitutional governance. The Renaissance, with its revival of classical learning, rekindled interest in democratic ideals, setting the stage for the revolutions to come. The Enlightenment and the modern era, democracy reborn. The Enlightenment of the 17th and 18th centuries marked a turning point in the history of democracy. Thinkers like John Locke, Montesquieu, and Jean-Jacques Rousseau challenged the legitimacy of absolute rule, advocating for the rights of individuals and the sovereignty of the people. Their ideas inspired the American and French revolutions, which sought to replace monarchy with republicanism and establish governments based on the consent of the governed. The United States, with its Constitution and Bill of Rights, became a beacon of democratic hope. Yet, even here, democracy was imperfect. The Founding Fathers, while championing liberty, enshrined slavery and excluded women and non-property owners from political participation. The French Revolution, meanwhile, descended into the Reign of Terror, a grim reminder of how quickly democratic ideals could devolve into mob rule. The 20th century, democracy's triumphs and tragedies. The 20th century saw democracy spread across the globe, fueled by the collapse of empires and the rise of nationalist movements. The two world wars, though devastating, strengthened the resolve of democratic nations to defend their values against totalitarianism. The Cold War, a struggle between democracy and communism, further solidified democracy's place as the dominant political ideology. Yet, the 20th century also exposed democracy's vulnerabilities. The rise of fascism in Europe, culminating in the horrors of World War II, demonstrated how easily democratic institutions could be dismantled by charismatic demagogues. The post-war period, while marked by democratic expansion, was also plagued by corruption, inequality, and the erosion of civil liberties. The Watergate scandal in the United States, the collapse of democracies in Latin America, and the persistence of authoritarian regimes in Africa and Asia revealed the fragility of democratic governance. The flaws of democracy, a system in crisis for all its achievements, democracy remains a flawed system. Its greatest strength, the ability to reflect the will of the people, is also its greatest weakness. Democracies are inherently susceptible to populism, the manipulation of public opinion, and the concentration of power in the hands of a few. The rise of money in politics, the influence of special interests, and the erosion of trust in institutions have further undermined democracy's legitimacy. Moreover, democracy's emphasis on majority rule often comes at the expense of minority rights. Throughout history, democracies have marginalized and oppressed vulnerable groups, from indigenous peoples to religious minorities. The tension between liberty and equality, between individual rights and collective welfare, remains unresolved. The threat of populism, democracy's greatest challenge in recent years, the rise of populism has emerged as the greatest threat to democracy. Populist leaders, claiming to represent the true will of the people, have exploited economic insecurity, cultural anxiety, and political disillusionment to undermine democratic institutions. From Donald Trump in the United States to Viktor Orban in Hungary, populists have attacked the press, the judiciary, and the rule of law, eroding the checks and balances that are essential to democracy. Populism thrives on division, pitting the people against the elite, us against them. It simplifies complex issues, scapegoats minorities, and promises easy solutions to intractable problems. Yet, populism is not a rejection of democracy, it is its dark reflection. It is democracy stripped of its ideals, reduced to raw majoritarianism and the pursuit of power. The future of democracy, a dark horizon. As we look to the future, the prospects for democracy appear bleak. The forces of globalization, automation, and climate change are exacerbating inequality and fueling discontent. The rise of digital technology, while offering new opportunities for participation, has also enabled the spread of misinformation and the manipulation of public opinion. Social media, once hailed as a tool for democratization, has become a weapon for authoritarian regimes and populist movements. The erosion of trust in institutions, the polarization of societies, and the rise of authoritarianism suggest that democracy is in decline. Yet, history teaches us that democracy is resilient. It has survived wars, revolutions, and economic crises. It has adapted to changing circumstances and overcome seemingly insurmountable challenges. The question is not whether democracy will survive, but what form it will take. Will it evolve into a more inclusive, equitable system, capable of addressing the challenges of the 21st century? Or will it devolve into a hollow shell, a facade for authoritarian rule? The answer lies in the hands of the people, in their willingness to defend the values of liberty, equality, and justice. Conclusion: a call to action. Democracy is not a given, it is a choice. It requires vigilance, participation, and a commitment to the common good. It demands that we confront our flaws, acknowledge our mistakes, and strive for a better future. The history of democracy is a story of struggle, of triumphs and tragedies, of hope and despair. It is a story that is still being written, a story that belongs to all of us. In the face of populism, authoritarianism, and the myriad challenges of our time, we must remember that democracy is not just a system of governance, it is an ideal, a vision of a world where power resides with the people, where every voice matters, and where justice prevails. The future of democracy is uncertain, but it is not yet lost. The choice is ours. Please like and subscribe.